It's that time, friends. Yep, it's that time. We have come to the end of another year. We've come to the end of another series of metal releases. So you know what that means? It's time to go back and review all the duds. It's time to go back and review all the stinkers. It's an ugly job, but somebody has to do it. Why? Because as years come and go, we've got to look back and review everything that went wrong. We also have to review everything that went right, but that's going to be in another video. This is when we go back and look at the 10 worst piles of dreck that fouled up the scene this past year. Ironically enough, there are some heavy hitters here. And I will admit, I had to put some of my favorite bands on this list. But if you're bad, and you belong on this list. Who will win the unenviable title of Worst of 2022? You'll have to watch and find out. Welcome to this very, very special edition of Metallic Reviews. This pains me. It really does. I love Demon Hunter. In terms of Christian metal, they're probably the best out there. Or at least, they're very, very close to it. They weave together melody like masters, tossing in this really crushing heaviness where appropriate. Unfortunately, on Exile, they focused way too much on telling a story, and they left the music in the dust. Now, I love the lyrics on this album. Ryan Clark continues to prove why he is one of the most underrated lyricists in the genre today. He might even be the most underrated one. However, in their haste to make a good concept album, they kind of forgot about the album. It's nowhere near the worst thing I've ever heard, but the plotting second half and some of the sudden stops sink this work. Simply put, there were much, much better Christian metal releases to enjoy this year. Why do I have to keep putting my favorite bands on this list? Calm down. Calm down. I guess it's called being objective. In my blatant subjectivity. In any case, Slipknot put out a dud this year. Plain and simple, and as I said before, if you're bad, and you deserve to be on this list. This is nowhere near the masterpieces that the band has put out in the past. The heaviness is gone, the melody is there, but it's uninspired, and Corey Taylor's vocal performance is somewhat lacking, and for a legend like him, that's saying something. There's also a ton of artsy stuff on here that just feels really tacked on. Craig Jones went wild with the synthesizers on here, but there aren't any of those fun, aggressive samples like on earlier albums. If Slipknot wanted their fans to pine for their self-titled album or Iowa, then this was the album to do it on. If you're new to the Slipknot game, don't bother with this one. They've done everything on here before, and they've done it much, much better. I do not recommend it. Finally, a band that I have an actual beef with. Well, kind of. I've just never been as impressed with Arch Enemy as I am with others in the Melodeath game, like At the Gates or Insomnium. Arch Enemy, to be frank, is unbalanced, and Deceivers is no exception. A plodding, mediocre trip through the gates of what I can only describe as unabashed, incomparable blandness, Deceivers comes and goes without a flicker. Sure, it's there, but what's there is disappointing. It's just another collection of tracks from a band where I consistently find that their output of singles drastically outweighs their actual albums. This one was a slog to get through, and frankly, I don't really remember any one single song off of it. Sure, their previous album wasn't great, but at least it manufactured 2 or 3 good songs. Deceivers was just bleh. Parrhesia. An impressive album title that hit a work that was trying to be too impressive. Again, it's definitely not the worst thing I've ever heard, but I did give it a rather low score. Just didn't hold anything memorable for me. In fact, as I was writing this up and going back through my review archives for the year, I kind of forgot that I reviewed it. Yeah, it didn't stick in the head and certainly didn't stick in the heart. As terrific of a guitarist as Tosin Abasi is, the work that this band does on a regular basis just seems somewhat directionless. I wish with all my heart that they'd get some kind of structural integrity to their music. Until they do, they're going to keep putting out somewhat bland albums like this one. It's another genty, proggy band. I'm starting to sense a trend here. Meshuggah are known among mainstream metal fans for The Rift to Bleed, one of the best ever written. They're also known for, honestly, not much else. They're a band that just kind of exists among the mainstream. However, they do have a very, very dedicated following. They also consistently wind up on best album lists each time they put something out. After this release, I'm still not buying the hype. Much as with Animals as Leaders, this record really leaned into what it was trying to convey. Now, that does normally work as a strength, but when a lot of your songs sound exactly like previous offerings, it tends to go stale and goes there very, very quickly. It's another dull album from a band that I have found to be very good at offering that same kind of music. Now, if this video didn't get hate for my inclusion of Meshuggah, then Candlemass may just be the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back. I got incredibly restless listening to this album. Now, I've never been the biggest Candlemass fan, but I definitely know their status as consensus legends of the Doom game. This was not an album befitting of legends, folks. It was more one befitting of people who are running out of complete ideas, so they toss a lot of half ideas on a record and think that somehow that will work. There are a ton of those here. Unfortunately, they circle back on each other and self-implode faster than the average blink. There's doom, there's traditional metal, and it all collides in one pile of mush. There are one or two good songs here, but it's not enough to counterbalance all the overwhelming sense of bad on here. This was one of the most uninspired death metal records I've ever heard. Now, in a year that gave us death metal records by groups like Venom Prison, Decapitated, Septic Flesh, and others, and those were all amazing, we had this petulant offering from a band that consistently ranks as one of the more premier death metal outfits, especially when you consider their status in the Brazilian scene. Now, I will admit that Christian is a band that has never really attracted me before this, but death metal is supposed to have certain aspects to it, and this album really didn't have them. The riffs fell short, there were a lot of directional issues, and frankly, the band didn't seem to know whether they wanted to make a tech record or a straightforward one. In any case, this release did not impress me. If you want good death metal from 2022, go listen to one of those other bands I mentioned. This is yet another band that's often considered in many circles to be a legend of their particular subgenre, in this case, crossover thrash. Yet, they're on this list, and quite close to the top, I might add. This one, frankly, was a dud, plain and simple. I can't think of a riff, a hook, or anything else that kept me invested in this album. This is another one, much as with the Animals as Leaders album from earlier, that when I went back and watched the review in preparation for this video, I was kind of surprised at some of the better stuff that I talked about with this one. The reason it's so low here is that I completely forgot everything about it. This is one that's not going to stick in your head beyond maybe one or two ideas, and that's simply one or two too few. This was yet another feeble attempt at doing something in the black metal realm, yet falling completely short of what it needed to be. A lack of anything innovative, even by black metal standards, doomed this album to the wastebasket of failure. Is it the worst black metal album ever? No, not even close. However, again, it's an album that's so repetitive and clings so much to ideas that are somewhat tired that it loses a big part of its identity. Now, I hate to keep using this word, but bad metal in 2022 was really defined by it, and that's simply forgettable. It was bland, it was boring, it was forgettable. I expected more out of a band that's been doing it as long as these guys have, but I was disappointed in what I found here. Before I move on to number 1, we do have one dishonorable mention. Yes, the worst album of the year is also the very first album I reviewed when I kicked the channel back into high gear in January. This one was something that didn't have any direction, any flavor, or anything outside of, hey, we're trying to be exactly like Butcher Babies. It falls into the realm of metal populated by other bands like Devil Driver, where they really don't know what they want to be. For a minute they're thrash, then they're groove, and then they've got some kind of neo-nu metal thing going on. Pair that with some of the goofiest lyrics this side of comedy metal, and you have the absolute worst that 2022 had to offer. This album was blander than sand, tossed with sheetrock in a pool of styrofoam packing peanuts. And that's really bland. This is one that I highly recommend skipping at all costs. Thanks so much for watching. Go ahead and click like, and do not forget to subscribe for more weekly Metallic reviews. Next time, there will be good to counteract the bad. And the nice thing is, the good list is actually longer than the bad list. That's how amazing 2022 was for metal. We will be diving into the 15, yes, I said 15 best albums of the year. There were some albums that originally I just had as honorable mentions, but I felt they deserved their own time to shine. So, all things considered, 2022 was a massive success for the genre, with the exception of the 10 in this video. Which will reign supreme? Who's taken home Album of the Year? You gotta tune in next time and find out. I hope you'll join me. You've been watching Metallic Reviews, where I give honest ratings to honest music. I will see y'all next time.